Hello and welcome to Positive Fandom. I am your host, Mmmm, and today we have with us once again Darth Plato here. How are you today, Darth Plato?
I'm good. Having a great morning. It's a little bit of a mishap with the lighting here, but I think it's going to work out fine. Good morning, and thank you everyone for coming.
Yes, absolutely. I don't hear any mishap. You sound fine, Darth Plato, so don't worry. Um, I'm just so glad that you are here. Guys, today, of course, we're going to be talking about a series that I am so incredibly fond of, a series that um, I first heard about from a family member. And ever since then, I've always wanted to watch it, but hadn't when it first came out. I do remember when it first came out, it was very popular. A lot of people were talking about it, but of course, I wasn't watching it at the time. And my father was the one who watched this series, Darth Plato. My dad was a huge fan of this series. And of course, the series I'm talking about that Darth Plato and I are going to be discussing is the Horatio Hornblower series that premiered in 1998. Um, Now, I first heard about this series, Darth Plato, as I mentioned, from my father, who was a huge fan of this series, just so incredibly impressed with it. Darth Plato, how did you hear about this series first? Let's say before you and I even started talking about it. When was the first time you had heard that they were making this series of Horatio Hornblower?
Well, I heard about it from a friend of mine, but I didn't actually get around to watching it until about maybe 10 years ago. I'm surprised that I waited that long to watch it, um, but I like the series a lot. I did not read the book. I read some of the short book, but not this book. There's a little slight music in the background. Do you know what that is?
Yes, I have music playing in the background.
Okay, fair enough. I wasn't sure if that was you or me.
No, it should sound like just a little bit of background music in the background. So,
All
is
right.
it disturbing you?
No, not at all. I was just curious if I had something off.
No, no, you didn't. You're perfectly fine. I do have music playing in the background, and sometimes when I do my streams, I have a little bit of music playing. So yes, Darth Plato, you were saying that you recently, I guess 10 years ago, discovered the series and started to enjoy it then. So how did you actually end up hearing about it then, you were saying?
I heard about it from a friend of mine who was much more into watching historical dramas than I was at the time.
Okay, okay, I hear you. And so I can understand that. I can see how, depending upon what you're into, you may not necessarily be too much into historical dramas. I know initially I used to watch them, but I was more sort of on the Jane Austen thing at that moment when Horatio Hornblower came out, and there was a lot of Jane Austen to be had at that time. One of the peak times for her stuff. And around the same time was another A&E production called Pride and Prejudice, which starred Jennifer Eel and Colin Firth, and that got a lot of screenplay and a lot of street cred for historical costume dramas. So I was heavily into that. So I remember my father mentioning Horatio Hornblower, and he was the one who told me all about it. And I actually can actually remember seeing him watch the series and how much he loved it. And it actually has a lot of good memories for me, not just the fact that the series is an excellent series, but it does remind me a lot of him. So there is that. So the series, first aired in 1998 to 2003. It's got 8 parts, and each part, Darth Plato, is like a movie, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's definitely has it, I don't know if it's consistent with all 8 episodes, but the first episode that we're going to watch definitely seems to have a 3 act structure. It's about an hour and 40 minutes.
It certainly is a generous amount of entertainment time, Darth Plato. You could go to a movie and watch a film for that amount of time. So they were generous in trying to adapt this particular show to, excuse me, adapt the book, one of the first books, to a particular pilot. And, I just really love what happens. Obviously, it's about Horatio Hornblower, who's a fictitious character. The author of the book is C.S. I can't remember the author's name. Um, I had it here. C.S. Forrester. I almost said C.S.
Forrester.
Lewis because I said it's not C.S. Lewis, it's C.S. Forrester who wrote the books. And of course, it's based on those books that were also tremendously popular.
Right.
And so Horatio Hornblower is this young fellow. He's probably about 16 or 17.
Yeah.
Um,
I think he wrote those books in the early 20th century. But it was a while ago.
yes, yes. And, they were a big hit. The
Right.
books were a big hit. And the Horatio Hornblower character is a midshipman who joins, the Navy, the British
Yeah.
Navy, more or less around the time of the French Revolution. And the stories kind of follow his career
Yes.
as a naval officer at this time period. And to be honest with you, the episode we're looking at is the first episode,
Hmm.
which is called "The Even Chance." I think it's had different names depending
Yeah.
upon what was aired.
Yeah.
Um,
In America, it's called The Duel. And I think in Britain,
yes,
it's called The Even Chance. Yeah.
yes, and we see we see kind of, the duel makes a little bit more sense in the description because we see that when Horatio first joins, kind of gets into his first assignment on the ship, that the episode it's anything but an even chance, right? Of course, it's played by I think it's is it Ian Griffin? I don't know how to say
I don't know
his
how to say his name either.
but he stars as the lead character that you can see in the picture here.
Yeah.
He stars as the lead character, and he was so young here. This might have been one of his first roles, Darth Plato. Of course, everybody knows him now for the role he played as I think it was Lightower. Maybe it wasn't Lightower, but he was in the Titanic, and he had a role in that film. He played a sailor there as well. Um, and also, he was for a short time in I think maybe one or two Fantastic Four movies that
Was
came
he?
out in the 90s. Do you remember Darth Plato?
Yeah. I do. I didn't make the connection that was him.
Yes, it was him. I think it was the ones that starred Jessica Alba as
Right.
well. So he starred in that, which was very interesting to see him in. Recently, I watched him in a series. It looks like it's an Australian series. I could be wrong. I think it's from Australia called Harrow. And he plays sort of a medical examiner slash detective who likes to solve different crimes out there. So there is that. So,
So from
okay.
naval officer to detective.
Yes, it was a show that had 3 seasons. It was very, very good. So, if you guys wanna see him now 25 years later or so, he's still acting, and that was a great series. He was great in that. If you like, those sorts of, that type of, TV show, which is actually pretty popular, anyway from what I have seen. So, Horatio, he steps into his first ship, Darth Plato, and it is a baptism by fire, isn't it?
Yeah. There's he goes right into it, and most of the people there treat him okay. They haze him a little bit, but the character of Simpson. And by the way, this is spoilers, by the way. And he gets harassed by a man named Simpson, who is the head of his division on the ship, the Justinian. The Justinian, by the HMS Justinian, by the way, is a 74 gun third rate. So which is a ship of the line, which is a middle of the road ship of the line, which means it has about 74 guns, and those were really the mainstay of the Royal Navy at that time. So that's a pretty decent posting. He's about 18 years old. He's a bit old for an officer. Officers usually start midshipmen when they're closer to like 14 or even 15 years old. They didn't have age caps in those days, and he seems to have a classical education. They make reference to that to the series. So he is educated. He is probably more educated than the average officer. That's for sure. And that might be something about why he's getting grief.
Yeah, he steps on there, and of course he's trying to adjust to the ship anyway. And you're right, Darth Plato. They do tell him they're kind of surprised that this is maybe his first posting, his first position, as many of the other midshipmen have probably been on the ship for 10 years, maybe
Yeah.
since they were,
Oh yeah.
practically children, maybe from 8 or 9. But you know something? It's 1793,
Yeah.
and at this point, it seems like the British are getting into skirmishes, either, I guess, with whomever they may or may not be at war with at the time. And, Hornblower pretty much finds him in these skirmishes and has adventures. And that's kind of the main theme or feel of the series, isn't it?
It is the wars at the time is against France. So what was going on at the time was the French Revolution, of course, was had been going on since 1789, but after the death of Mirabeau and the National Convention, the revolution slowly started to go off the rails. There was the flight to Bahrain, where Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette tried to flee to Austria. That did not succeed, and that really started to escalate matters between the European states. You had what was called the Declaration of Pillnitz, where some of the Europeans declared that if any harm were to come to the king, that there would be a declaration of war. That is what in fact happened. And you see that in the episode where the king is in fact beheaded. They don't show it, but it is mentioned that he is beheaded, like he is guillotined, and that is so. That's how we know it's 1793 because that was in January of 1793. As for Britain, so Britain was not party to the Declaration of Pillnitz, but they were, however, very concerned about the French involvement in the Netherlands, which the British considered essential to their trade. And so the British sent considerable support into the Netherlands to fight against the Jacobites, they were called, the Sans Culottes, they were called. The Dutch had their own version of the revolution going on, and the Paris responded with a declaration of war. So the Paris did declare war, not in London, and that's really how the war started. Very briefly.
No, thank you for that. We need to know that there's a lot going on. And of course, Horatio finds himself now in a midshipman and kind of in the middle of all this. And something, Darth Plato, I think that when he steps on this boat, and we're not so shocked that he might have a little bit of harassment here.
Sure.
There's always competition, between midshipmen, especially some of them wanting to have a higher rank. They do have to qualify for things in order to do that. They have to put in time, but they also have to take examinations. Just like today, I think it's a lot of that.
That's
Um,
true.
but what I think is also kind of interesting is, part of the harassment that does go on, though, is it's really kind of to, like, not get rid of, but kind of intimidate officers to improve advancement in a sense. Like if you can take it, you can handle it. But for those that can't, a lot of times it allows other officers to kind of take advantage of, a position or being able to do something. Now, it turns out that the officer who's kind of harassing some of the guys there is the one who's their commanding officer, right? Right, Darth Plato?
Yeah, yeah, he's the head of the division, meaning that he's really in charge of organizing the men for the various ships' duties that they have. Actually, I want to comment about the Simpson for a moment. You're right about the hazing, and sometimes the younger men get harassed. That's true, but in the case of Simpson, this there's something else going on here. There's two kinds of bullies. There's bullies because it's learned behavior for whatever reason. They learn to be bullies and they get comfortable with it. And there's bullies where sometimes someone just enjoys bullying other people. The difference between learned behavior and just genuinely enjoying it. I think Simpson is the latter. I think he enjoys being a bully.
Yeah, you make a good point, and I think that perhaps for him, this is sort of the thing that he does enjoy, and it's at the expense of everyone else, unfortunately. this hazing, this bullying that he's
Yeah.
doing is not necessarily, it's going to affect performance, but in some cases, it actually affects some of the health of the midshipmen going forward. This type of harassment can kind of spook someone. And can you imagine, being that young and having to handle it? It can't be easy under those types of conditions. So we also see another situation, Darth Plato, where they are having lessons taught to them by a senior officer who wants, it's maths, right? So you have to be strong in maths in order to really, plot charts and look at angles and things like that. So
It
it,
helps.
yes, it does help. That's the only way they're going to be able to do any of this. And it's another opportunity for Horatio to be singled out as, of course, having excelling here, probably because he was in school and had lessons much longer than these other
It was.
midshipmen. But he finds himself being the focus again by Simpson, who resents the fact that he is being singled out. And the senior officer makes a point of saying, well, Horatio, if you keep this up, you are going to be the best. You're going to
Yeah.
go so far. You're going to be commanding the entire fleet or something like that. And that really irked Simpson. So, I
Sure.
think it's very interesting that that happened. And ironically, all of this, I mean, we have heard of duels before, right, Darth Plato?
Sure.
Um, and right here, there's some famous duels in the U.S. In history. But how often do you think these duels took place for these midshipmen and officers in the British Navy?
It was more common in the past than it was here. It's really sort of a gentleman's thing. It's more of a gentleman's game, really. Uh, Satisfying honor. I wouldn't say it happened all the time, but it was known to happen. There was it was very controversial at the time. So there was a lot of humanitarians spoke out against it, it violated the rule of um, whatever shoot the whatever it was called, the idea that the state has a monopoly on the use of force is a very important concept when going from the days of absolutism to the age of more of a liberal bureaucracy. So you shouldn't be taking the law into your own hands. So that's really where dueling sort of emerged in that time between those two things, and why it ultimately went away. It went away faster in other countries than and others. In England, it was looked down upon, and it went away pretty soon. Like America, for example, it went away very soon. It was very looked down upon in America as well. It did carry on in France for a long time, and also there were different rules for dueling. What you saw there was just one way it could play out. Sometimes they would pace out, turn around, and fire simultaneously rather than take turns. So there were different rules for how that worked,
Well,
and sometimes swords were involved.
yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because, of course, you and I have both seen duels in other shows in the past. And, you're right. I have seen a variation of how it would be carried out and, when people were permitted to shoot and things of that nature. So, yes, I can see that the rules were very different depending upon the situation. One thing I can say, though, is that Horatio is smart enough not to write home and say that he's being harassed or, things aren't going great, or, when they tie him up onto the ship, in the rain, because I guess, he may have a little bit of fear of heights, which I think is natural. Though, gee, those masts are tall. I mean, it's really, really high. I can understand the fear of ever even having to go up there. But tying him up there in the rain, I don't know whether that was a really nice thing to do to him, but he has to take it. He's got to roll with the punches, even if it means that his meal gets taken from him or he can't sit at a certain place at the table. But um, I was kind of curious, Darth Plato, and of course, you and I are talking about this, and we already know that um, in this first segment where a duel takes place, because there's actually more than one duel that takes place in this episode, but so maybe it should be called the duels. But
Well, and yeah, and Well, actually, you could take it one step further. Instead of the face-to-face duel with the pistol, there's also naval duels, and there's also the duel of wits, like with the French merchant captain. That's sort of a duel of sorts. There's a duel of wits there, and of course
Absolutely.
there's the duel at sea towards the end where you have the Indefatigable and the three French corvettes. That you could also call that a naval duel. So in a way, you could just call it. You could say there were four duels.
Absolutely, Darth Plato. And so in this first altercation, we find another officer taking initiative. That's what I'm going to call it. He decides that he's not going to allow Horatio
Clayton, yeah,
actually go ahead and do this duel. I
yeah.
find it fascinating, Darth Plato, because
That was allowed. Yeah,
yeah, I have. First of all, I'd never heard of anything like that before. But we also know Darth Plato, he also knew that there was nothing he could do to really keep Horatio away. With the only thing he could do was to knock him out and make sure he wasn't even awake while this was happening. So he knew that was the only thing he could do. Second to maybe tying Horatio up to keep him away from this. What do you think about that? By proxy, duel by proxy. But it seemed like these two already had a beef before Horatio even got there. What do you think? Do you think these sorts of things happened a lot? We know that people would substitute one person for another sometimes. Do you think that that was something that that officer should have done?
well, that's an interesting question. You can actually look at it a number of different ways. On the one hand, he respects Horatio because he sees him as potentially the future of the Navy. On the other hand, he's not. He's also sort of interfering in Horatio's business, where it's just part of what it means to be a young man at the time is you take control of your own life. You deal with your own problems. You don't have other people deal with your problems, which is why he did not mention in the letter to his family that he's being harassed. He doesn't mention it because this is my problem. I will solve it. I'm not going to call home and just and whine about it. And that tells me that there's a certain degree of pride in Horatio. That the fact that he does that. So the fact that Clayton knocks him out and fights the duel in Horatio's place might be a little irksome for Horatio. If Clayton had survived, Horatio might have had some choice words with him. But we know both Clayton doesn't survive. And it would have been interesting to see that conversation play out had Clayton lived.
Yeah, it would have been interesting because this is something that I think uh you know Horatio wouldn't have had a choice in anyway. I think if they had the discussion, Darth Plato, Horatio would have lost. He would have had no choice but to follow orders because he's the lowest person, the lowest midshipman there. So I don't believe that he would have gone above this other midshipman in order to have this fight, no matter how upset he may have been, and no matter how he feels that he should have acted. I'm glad that he did, this other gentleman intervened on his behalf because I felt almost as if he was just too ignorant of the whole picture, Darth Plato. Sometimes things can happen on both sides. Now, that may not have been the case here, but it certainly would have been something that I would have been too early for me to go ahead and get involved in. And good morning to you, Tom Jr. Jackson, my collaborator and my moderator and very good friend. We are all good people. Sends in a 99-cent super chat. Thank you so much, Tom Jr. Jackson. That is so appreciated for all that you do. All the other things you don't that I don't give you credit for, like making 90% of my thumbnails and talking about different topics. Thank you, Tom Jr. Jackson. It's so appreciated. Always good to see you here. And I also want to say hello to some of the other people who are here, Darth Plato. We had RRTNZ. Hi, RRTNZ. So great to see you this morning. Hope you are well. Michael Beacom is here. Hello, Michael, and the Outcast Creatives who sing this shout out and say their Outcast Creative member, Frank Boyce, is actually in this Horatio Hornblower series that we're talking about, as well as Gas Monroy, who talks about what an excellent series it is. Yes, you can see elements of Kirk and Picard certainly here.
Good morning, everybody.
Absolutely. Good morning to you all.
Well,
Uh,
actually, I'm going to comment on the last part.
Certainly,
The character of Hornblower, especially probably in the books also, but I didn't read the books. But in the TV series, there are, historically speaking, there are elements of his life that you can see in the history of real people, like well-known captains at the time, Thomas Cochran, George Cockburn, Sidney Smith. So there were a number of well-known personalities at the time, and I think Hornblower is really meant to be a an amalgamation of these different people,
of course, of
and,
course. The
and
best and perhaps the highlights of so many well-known officers of that time period that were written and studied about, and also their actions were written and studied
that's
about,
right.
right,
Yeah,
Darth
I
Plato?
that's right. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the actions that you see Hornblower perform personally are derivative of real events. I wouldn't be surprised if that were true.
Absolutely. And so there is that. And so with that being said, there are quite a few um, scholars who study naval history, and of course, people in the military who also study naval history. So it is something that does happen on a regular basis. And having an adaptation like this is very special. When you think about it from that point of view, at least when I think about it, because it's not easy to put these costume dramas together. You're working on the water. You have to have an ensemble. It's usually an ensemble cast like this.
Right.
It really is. No, Tom, it's not a new show. Tom, this is the Horatio Hornblower series that came out in 1998 to 2003 that stars Ian Gruffand. And I'm sorry, guys, if I pronounced his name incorrectly. So it does have some years on it, Tom. But it certainly hasn't lost any of its intensity, has it, Darth Plato?
I'm sorry, what? I was
It
reading the
certainly
chat.
hasn't, even though it has had quite a few years on it, meaning that it is about 25 years old or so, or let's say 20 years, it hasn't lost any of its intensity, has it?
It might have. I'm not really sure. I don't. Um,
Well, I don't think it has.
uh, I, it probably was based on the success of the Sharpshooter. That's probably true. Uh, but that lasted longer than the Homebrewer series. I'm not sure why. That maybe it was just cost value. I don't know.
Well, the Outcast creative, and I'm guessing it might be Lance, but if it's not Lance, and it's one of those amazing members of the Outcast creative, welcome here this morning. Whoever you are, says this show was commissioned because of the success of Sharp, but never quite managed to replicate its success. Okay. So thank you so much, Outcast Creative, for letting us know that. And certainly, I wasn't aware of how successful this show was. What I do know is that when you get something like this, you're very lucky to get it. Something, especially when they commit to so many episodes, Darth Plato. Certainly,
Yeah,
you're
long
very
episodes.
lucky. Yes.
They're movies. They're practically. It's like watching 8 movies.
It really is. I mean, it's so enjoyable to see. And of course, Darth Plato, you've mentioned it. Um,
It's the Hornblower cinematic universe.
it is. It certainly is. And you've mentioned this earlier in our broadcast that England now finds itself at war with France, and of course, all the
It's Paris
everybody.
declared war.
Yes, everybody who's on, excuse me, everybody who's on the boat is brought onto deck, and they're talking about, they're being briefed by one of the senior commanders that they're at war with France. And, fortunately, things seem to be looking up um, for Horatio after this duel, even though it's true that his friend was killed, was fatally,
Right in the end.
wounded. Um, Horatio finds himself on a new ship with, and I hope I'm saying his name right, Pelu, who is an incredible captain on the ship.
Yes, he's actually the one person in the series that to date who's actually a real person. There really wasn't such a man.
So you're saying that you believe, is it true then that he's based on the actual character Darth Plato?
Yes.
Well, then that's wonderful to know that. And I didn't know that. But it is wonderful to see something like that. Um, and you know something, when Horatio uh, has a chance to talk to Pelu for a moment, because he has to speak with him about what's going on with the ship and his career. Pelu is very honest about how disappointed he is in him, more or less. Let's say he doesn't say it, but I get the sense that he's disappointed in Horatio for even being involved in this duel.
Right.
Uh,
That goes to what I was saying before about how duels were seen in society. Some people thought it was a perfectly natural part of gentleman life, and others were very much against it. It really depends on who you talk to.
Yes, yes. And, it is very interesting. I would be upset with Horatio for being involved in this, even though you and I both know, and everyone who's watched it, that he almost had no choice. He was kind of forced into this situation. But I would be, disappointed so early in his career that he had to deal with this. And it is a warning, isn't it, Darth Plato, where Pelu tells him, look, I'm not going to have this on my watch.
Hmm.
We're not going to have these things happen on my watch, because
Sure.
what it means,
There's also a more practical reason why you could be saying that. Also,
yes,
the Britain wasn't exactly in good financial times in those days, 1780s and into the 1790s, well into past 1800. It's not a good time economically. In times like that, the military is usually the one that takes on the chin. So he needs good officers. I think he sees that in Hornblower. He's a good officer. And the worst thing, and they're also at war now. This is not peacetime; they're now at war. So he needs good men, particularly now. He doesn't want to see this guy that he sees as really bright and promising get shot up in a duel. And by the way, Wellington was the same way when he was commanding the army in Spain. He outlawed dueling. He said, "I will not have it in my army." And I think the reason why that was is because he didn't want officers that he valued just getting involved in personal conflicts and having it out in the duel, even though he himself was known to do that. He personally thought that dueling was a perfectly fine thing to do in a gentleman's society. He wasn't against it, but in his command he wouldn't have it.
yeah.
Pelu seems to be the different kind. He doesn't support it in regardless of any situation. So people come from different places.
Well, if I were, and I'm not, so just hear me out here. This is just my opinion as someone who, if I had to manage these officers, I wouldn't want anything else getting in the way of the mission. So, from a pure interference point of view, I would tell them that any dueling is out of the question. And, if they do it, they'll be court-martialed or something. But I couldn't have this sort of stuff, this dissension and whatever it is interfering with the way the ship runs, because it is a major interference, isn't it, Darth Plato?
Yeah, there's nothing worse than having your lieutenant all of a sudden not be available.
Yeah. And so, I think it was very interesting. And I did just want to read this comment from Outcast Creatives, who says it's a decent show, but the amount of naval action is limited in the show due to budget constraints and CGI. And he meant a correction, was not advanced enough to do the battles at the time the show was created. But something, I understand what you're saying, the Outcast Creative, and thank you for saying that. I still love it though.
Well,
Um,
you could say that about the Sharp series too, honestly,
yes.
but
And
that lasted longer.
Absolutely. Michael Beacom says the advantage of the period pieces is that they don't age in the conventional sense. Actually, it's a good thing in my opinion because it would not be made today. Interesting. I feel that way about the A&E series Pride and Prejudice with Jennifer Ill and Colin Firth,
I
which
haven't seen it.
I absolutely love. Have you seen it, Dark Plato?
I have not seen
Yes, I imagine a lot of people have not seen this. If you do not like Jane Austen and her, these adaptations of her stories, you wouldn't have seen it. But it was an incredibly
it. When
popular
was it set?
and well-made series that kind of pushed Jennifer Eel into stardom, which she never capitalized on, which was also very odd. But it was just done so beautifully. If you like seeing costumes and some of the areas of outstanding natural beauty in Great Britain.
When
Um,
was it set?
it was a series that came out in the 90s, Darth Plato.
But I'm at the setting though.
The setting was, oh gee, I don't know, maybe the Midlands.
Okay, I'll look it up.
So it was the English countryside, but it also had some London scenes as well, Darth Plato. And it was around, I'm trying to think of what year. It was the Napoleonic era. It really, if you are a fan of Jane Austen's books, they all are around that time of the Napoleonic era. So
Okay, there's a lot. There's a lot of series based in that time period. I think Poldark was another series based in that time period. I saw that.
yes, I loved Poldark as well. I've seen, I think there's two that I've seen, which was one from the 70s and then one recently, which was absolutely spectacular, that came out a few years ago. So we've been really lucky, those series being adapted again. Um, and the Outcast Creatives has another interesting comment about they would film three of the shows back to back. It's still amazed. I'm still amazed there has not been a Battle of Trafalgar movie or series yet. But with the advances in tech, I'm sure someone in time will do it. Yes, that would be great to see. And John Thomas, hello, John Thomas. Welcome to Positive Fandom and our review of Horatio Hornblower season one,
Well,
episode one. Um,
to be fair, trying to show something like Trafalgar would be hard to do because battles are hard to do in general because they're so confusing. It's it would be really hard for an audience to watch something like that and really understand what's going on because you don't know who's shooting at who really. Um, Trafalgar was one of those battles where it would be hard to do because of the movements were so chaotic. It's some things are easier to show than others. Like but that doesn't mean the audience is going to appreciate it. I'll give you a good example. Is in the Alexander movie that was about 20 at Colin Farrell, I think there was a battle. There was an extensive battle scene there that I thought was really well done. It's the best battle scene I've ever seen depicted in any film,
wow.
but it's not well received by the public because you couldn't see anything because it was so dusty. But that's exactly what a battle would have been. It would have been incredibly dusty, and you wouldn't be able to see really more than 5 feet in front of you. And so it was really well done, but just because it was well done doesn't mean people are going to respond to it because they don't really know what's going on. I think Trafalgar would have suffered the same problem. Uh, the personalities, I don't know. I don't know if Nelson is interesting enough of a personality that you want to show on screen. He's a very vainglorious individual.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that. And of course, if that's the case, then we would hope that they would have someone who is vainglorious to play the role. Darth Plato in that manner. David Weber says, excuse me, John Thomas says David Weber based his Honor Harrington series on Horatio. Thank you so much, John Thomas.
Yeah, I saw some of those books. Yeah.
And of course,
Unfortunately, unfortunately, Honor is a bit of a Mary Sue in my opinion. So if you're not, if you don't like Ray from the new prequel, then you're probably not going to like Honor Harrington.
well, John Thomas also goes on to say Pride and Prejudice and Zombies is a superior adaptation. I actually own that movie and I own the original. I own about six or seven copies, different adaptations of Pride and Prejudice, either miniseries and or movies. So I can't get enough of it. I thought that they wanted you to have a laugh in Pride and Prejudice and Zombies during that whole craze. So there is that, guys. And so, Darth Plato, um, it's and I don't even know how to necessarily say this, but so Horatio got a stroke of luck being under Pilu's command, and he was going to need it too because no sooner had this happen that they find themselves in another skirmish, Darth Plato, and you know also we find that Horatio um, manages to save or try to save one of the gentleman under his command.
Mr.
Uh,
Kennedy.
I can't remember if it's that gentleman, but he manages to try and save him. He's lost a leg. And at the same time, while he's trying to save him, everybody else is sort of having glory in the battlefield and he's kind of missed everything. And,
Mhm.
I thought it was very interesting they decided to show that he decided to pick trying to save someone's life versus continuing with the battle, they're downstairs. The surgeon is working on an officer, and the officer has a wound to his arm, which he certainly will recover from. But Horatio fights to have that sailor looked at because he's lost a leg or something that's incredibly severe. So they made a point of showing Horatio has a different look on things. He feels that triage is different. It's a more severe wound. And then by the time he makes it back up to the top of the ship, maybe a half an hour later, the battle or whatever altercation or skirmish is done. And he's missed all the glory. I think Kennedy talked about how he killed one person and it was amazing. Where were you? Where were you, Horatio? But it doesn't stop Horatio from getting his first command, Darth Plato.
Yeah, it's I'd be referring to the when they captured the papillon.
Yes, that is
Yeah,
what I'm referring to.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, Mr. Kennedy is a recurring character in the series. We'll be seeing him again a lot. And an interesting point about Mr. Kennedy is he's actually I don't know the actor's name off the top of my head, but he was actually Leodama in the Battlestar series.
yes, yes, that's right. And it's good to see him here in this series as well, Darth Plato. And I want to say hello to Julian Mushkin. Good morning to you, Julian Mushkin. So nice to see you here this morning. Julian says, I really liked the Honor Harrington books. Um, and that is great. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
there were aspects of it that I did like.
yeah, a lot of you are talking about Honor Harrington. I guess I'm going to have to look at it. Was that made into a series, Darth Plato?
I don't think so. They were
Oh,
talking about it, but I don't think so.
okay. Well, it is great to see you here, Julian, and everyone who is here this morning. Thank you so much for stopping by as we're talking about episode one of the Horatio Hornblower series from 1998. And, so Horatio ends up getting his first command. And this is another version of the duel that you were talking about, Dark Plato. Not an easy situation. He has to kind of command this boat and prisoners, the French prisoners from the boat. But there's a problem. The boat is damaged and maybe more damaged than what they realize.
Yeah, the
Um,
Mugalon.
yes. And of all things, the boat has a particular payload that tends to absorb water. I hope I'm saying the right thing. That is what happened in this case, right, Darth Plato?
Um, yeah, I'm not sure what the term was at the time. I think it took a shot below the belt.
Yes, yes, that didn't help things at all in this particular case. And I think even going underwater and trying to figure out how the boat is damaged, it has some kind of problem now. They thought it was in a ship shape order, but it's not. It's actually in very she's been hurt. And I think they do something. I'm not even quite sure what this is called. You take some kind of a cloth and tries to cover it, but it doesn't save the boat.
Mm,
And unfortunately, they all end up in a smaller boat.
a
Um,
launch, yeah.
yes, and it's very uncomfortable, Darth
Yeah,
Plato.
and
He
it does illustrate Hornblower's capacity for forward thinking and anticipation, and that is something that the military values is men who are able to do that exactly that sort of thing, be able to look at the situation intelligently and improvise on the spot without being too liberal in their orders, of course. And this is a good illustration of that. This is a it really shows his acumen.
Absolutely. One of the things I like about of course, everybody remembers that. I think it was a Hitchcock film, Raft. I think it's called Raft, where there are survivors on this raft, and pretty much how are we going to survive on this raft when everybody is not or may not have been on the same side, and so you have a hint of this here. Um, I don't remember how many British soldiers there were. I don't remember how many French soldiers there were, but the French captain is on there, right? Darth Plato?
You're talking about the merchant ship?
Yes, the
Yeah,
one.
yeah. They're not really soldiers. They're just men contracted for the journey. I don't know, and they may not have been soldiers at all. They probably weren't.
Well, he's the captain of the ship if it's his
Sure.
ship, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the captain of the ship is there. And so now Horatio, who is, much younger than him, is in a position where he's supposed to be taking, be in command.
Yeah.
And it goes back and forth in a very unique way. But what's even more interesting is when Horatio decides that he's going to trick them using math.
But he was anticipating a coup. If they didn't rise up, then they didn't rise up, but they did, and he was ready for it, and he stepped in. It's and then you have really that sort of duel. There's a duel going on there.
It really is a duel going on. He knows that they can't get that tool in order to measure where they are because then it would give them the advantage. So he drops that in the water, right?
Yeah, he throws it with the comp. Well, with the compass, they would have known where they were going. But he had the chart marked up wrong to throw the other guy off. I don't know if that would really work, honestly, but apparently it did.
Yes, and it was very clever. It was fun to see that play out, and of course, all the while, the French captain is trying to convince them to kind of let's go back to France. Let's go to
Right,
France, just down the road,
right. Yeah, sure. Yeah,
But
sure.
it was really a lot of fun to watch what was going to happen in that scenario, and of course, Horatio and his crewmen managed to regain control. And when he does arrive back on the Indefatigable, I think that's what the ship is. Um,
Indefatigable.
he ends up getting another Data Boy, only to find themselves a few days later in one more skirmish that is pretty significant in a sense.
Yeah, that was
Horatio,
the one with the papillon.
yes, Horatio proves himself once again by telling Pilu, "Hey, you know something? Why don't we at least go over there and assist?" And we get to see his, somewhat more aggressive interference that does pay off. But what's interesting about that whole thing is not the fact of the outcome of it, but who he ends up rescuing as they launch lifeboats for survivors. And
Mm.
of course, it's
Simpson, yeah. Mm.
midshipman Simpson, who is now back in his life. And it's uncomfortable, Darth Plato.
Mm. I imagine so.
It didn't go away. That whole thing hasn't gone away, and there even becomes a power struggle in the sense because he outranks Horatio,
Sure.
and Horatio's like, "Hell no! The captain told me I'm in charge, and that's how this is going down."
Yeah, he's lucky that he had the confidence of them. By this time, he had proven himself to the men around him, and so when it came time to assert himself like that, he was backed up by people who would support him, and that's what part of being a good officer is. They're gonna uh, a good man is gonna come to your aid, and Simpson, went to the brig.
Yes, and so now at this point, Horatio is capable of pretty much saying, "Well, take him below," and that's exactly what happens. He gets put sort of like he gets put in I guess in jail or whatever you want to call it,
Mm.
down below in the ship, and then of course after everything is said and done, Horatio calls out Simpson for firing at him during battle. Now,
Yeah.
how common do you think that would be, Darth Plato, for someone to do something like this, knowing what it would mean to accuse a fellow officer of trying to kill you?
Well, it's making a charge without proof was probably going to get you called out in a duel. That's true. But in this case, however, it really happened. But unfortunately, he didn't have any witnesses to say yes, I saw that. Then in which case that would have been a matter for the court. But because it was one word against the other guy, and one guy outranks the other, that
Oops. Oh, Darth Plato, I think we lost you for a moment. I'm not. Oh, here we go. He's coming. He's back. Hi. You were saying
yeah,
so.
I don't know what happened.
One person outranked the other.
Right. I don't know how often that happened. Honestly, I don't. But it seems like a likely story. It could happen this way. And who knows? Maybe it's actually based on a real event. It could have been.
Certainly, and he Simpson knows being the senior officer, he has the upper hand and is most likely to be believed. But I think that he's played every card he can play,
Well,
and
there's another angle. Actually, there's another. I'm sorry. There's another angle on this. Actually, about this is that Simpson actually is he's an outsider. He asked permission to join the crew, to join the mission. He's actually technically not a member of the crew, so technically, uh, Hornblower doesn't answer to him. Technically, so even though he's the ranking officer on the scene, he's not actually part of the crew. So that also could be a little wiggle room for Hornblower. So he's
absolutely.
there. So since there is a guest, he's not actually part of the chain of command.
Absolutely. Certainly, somebody you just rescued off of a life raft may not necessarily have the role or the ability or herewithal to claim that they should be in charge at that moment. You have just been rescued, and it's not a time for you necessarily to take charge of everything, being sort of an outsider, as you mentioned. But Simpson is going to play it any way he can, and of course, here we go again with Pelu actually witnessing this entire thing play out in front of him, but maybe not so surprised by this second situation with Simpson, asking to duel with Horatio again, and so Paley makes an exception. He lifts his restriction from Horatio to go through with this. Why do you think he did this, Darth Plato?
I think it's just the respect he had for Horatio, and then he after what Horatio had done up to this point, that he trusted Horatio's judgment. I think that's why. I think that's simple reason.
Yes, and of course, the duel does take place. I'm not going to go through all the particulars, but let's just say the duel ends in Palu himself dishing out justice as he saw fit, which means that he actually ends up shooting Simpson, which
Yeah.
is not a surprise to me. Were you surprised that Palu actually had, Horatio's was looking,
It
had
was yeah, it was a surprise. I was surprised that they resolved the scene that way. I think they should have just had the duel and just be done with it. But they chose to do it this way. Why Pelu? Why I don't know what the explanation is for why Pelu just happened to be standing there with a gun at the ready. Uh, well, that situation had to be resolved. It wasn't just that he had the confidence of a Hornblower, but the Simpson thing was a toxic thing, and it was very toxic and needed to be resolved. And it wasn't a simple matter of just sending him on his way. A charge had been made, and it wasn't. You couldn't just make it go away. It had to be resolved. So the duel had to take place, really, regardless of what he thought about Hornblower. And
the
I,
other thing that
yeah,
I think is interesting, Darth Plato, is that I don't believe that these two duels that we witnessed that Simpson was involved in were the first duels he's ever had. I have a feeling that, like you said, he enjoys bullying,
yeah,
and he's probably done this maybe a good portion of his career.
okay,
And so I think that Palu may have access to this. We don't have access to it, but Palu is the somewhat more omniscient here
mm-hmm,
and has access to maybe Simpson's record and sees that he's been involved in skirmishes with other officers, and he's kind of Palu is kind of a bad person, and not good for the Navy necessarily, but there was no way to necessarily get rid of him,
yeah.
except to put him in a situation where he had a firearm in his hand that could justify why he was going to shoot him. In other words, I think this was the captain's intention all along. Um, what do you think about that comment?
You might well be right about that. That's true. And Simpson certainly was more experienced. That's true. And there's certainly I wouldn't be surprised if there were people in those days that were they were marked. They were expert marksmen, and they just went around because of the rush. There's a certain rush to being in battle or being in a duel and just going out and looking for trouble. I wouldn't be surprised if there was people that went around and did that. It's probably very possible.
Certainly. I think there certainly was more to this than meets the eye when it came to that particular altercation. And, it took me a while to kind of think on it a little bit because, Pelu was incredibly ready. I think this is a picture of him.
Mm.
He was so ready to, as he was watching what was going on.
Yeah, he was a very good captain.
Yes, and
Mm.
he didn't have to watch that because remember in the previous duel, I don't know whether the captain was around, but Pelu knew he had to be present for this one for whatever might happen. But he, as I said, he
Well,
dealt
that,
out
he was on the other ship at that point.
Yes, or whoever the captain was. He wasn't the captain, I think, at the time when
Yeah.
they had that skirmish, but I could be wrong. But you know what? I think I love the line that he says, "I dealt out justice the way I saw fit," and I think that that's one of the things that's going to be the theme here. In addition to the adventures, justice is going to have to be dealt out throughout this series. And I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed this episode. How about you, Darth Plato?
Yeah, this is a good. It was a good introductory episode. It really shows him where he comes onto the boat and he's just completely raw. Heck, he even not used to. He's obviously not used to being at sea. He gets seasick, and
Absolutely.
they're not even at sea. So he's completely green, completely raw, but he has good judgment. He has good character. His loyalty to his friends. He's a good officer that looks out for his men, and he plays that role. He's put into situations, and through a series of good judgment calls, he is recognized by men that are in a position to recognize that and push him on and push him along to promotion. And Pele is a perfect example of this. There were men in the Navy that didn't care about that sort of thing. They were probably more interested in patronage than they were in actually promoting good men because we need good men. Pele was less interested in the patronage and more interested in advancing good men. And Hornblower is fortunate that he had both Keen as a captain who recognized that he needs to be moved on. He can't stay here. He has to be moved on to another ship, and and of course Pelu for recognizing Hornblower for what he is and moving him on. But it all has to do with Hornblower's decision making and his character. That's the most important thing. If there's any one word that can describe Hornblower, it's his character.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I just love the series so much. And I just want to thank you, Darth Plato, for joining me here this hour to review the first episode. We are going to review all the episodes. I did want to mention to everybody watching, thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already subscribed here to Positive Fandom, please do. If you want to continue to see programming about these shows that we love, certainly this is one of many. And next week, Darth Plato and I are going to be reviewing another show, part one of Josephine and Napoleon and Josephine, a love story that stars Armand Asante and Jacqueline Bisset. We're going to be reviewing the part one on Friday at 10 next week. So please do join us next week for that. And we're going to continue reviewing more historical series here on Positive Fandom.
It's
Um,
just well, how many parts is that going to be? That's a long watch.
of which one?
The Napoleon Josephine.
Well, we're going to do part one.
Hold on, hold on.
Is that okay? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, I
okay.
agree. I agree.
So we could do part one. I know that there are three parts, right,
Okay.
Darth Plato?
Yeah, it's a long watch. Yeah,
Okay, so
it was originally a TV movie.
exactly. And Darth Plato, you said that there is a Napoleon film coming up.
I thought it was a series on Apple Plus. Could be wrong
I'm
about
sorry, a
that.
series coming up.
At least I think it is. It's hard. It's hard to do the life of someone like that in a movie because it's just so complicated to do something like that. But yeah, I believe so. I believe it's. I thought it was on Apple Pod. I could be wrong about that, but I think Ridley Scott. But Ridley Scott is doing it though.
Well, that's so exciting, Darth Plato. We know this is going to be a fantastic series.
I hope so. We'll see. I hope it doesn't get weird because he seems to be Scott seems to be focusing on his earlier years of Napoleon's life, which does seem a little weird because he's being played by Joaquin Phoenix.
Yes.
But Napoleon in his early years, he wasn't that age. So here they're using a much older actor to portray him at that age. I don't know how they're doing it exactly. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but um, there is a sort of a fairly common trend in Napoleon scholarship recently, however, that trying to make it sound like Napoleon was a lot of his inspiration was due to this weird sexual pseudo stuff, and that has nothing to do with his decision making. And I hope they don't play into that at all. I really hope.
Well, we shall see. And the Outcast Creative does confirm it's Ridley Scott's
Yeah,
and that his company is doing Napoleon and it is huge budget. We can't wait to see that. We are
budget.
kind of looking at these stories, which are around the same era. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this look at episode 1 of Horatio Hornblower. Live long and prosper, everybody. Darth Plato, where can people find you?
Right here, right here on a positive fandom, the It Show.
That's right, guys. You can find Darth Plato right here in Positive Fandom. Guys, you can find me, RM, on Positive Fandom, but you can also find me on the Burr Network, as well as the 1/6 Scale Man Network or Lorraine Creole's channel as well. I have some things coming up this upcoming week. Tonight, I will be streaming with Lorraine for our anime series. Um, I believe this weekend I'll be streaming with Robert for our midnight musing show, 10:30 a.m. on Sunday Eastern Standard Time. I'll be doing my Sunday brunch show, and on Sunday night here on Positive Fandom, I'm going to be doing a live review of The Last of Us at 9:30 p.m., a series I can't wait to see. Monday nights, I'll be on the Burr Network at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time doing Ladies of the PGS. Monday at 9 p.m., I'll be on The Market Show with Aries Tarrington talking about 1/6 scale figures. And on Tuesday, I will be reviewing part 2 of the Ottoman Empire right here on Positive Fandom at 5 p.m. on Tuesday with Cameron Pasha. It's the series that is Rise of Empires, Vlad versus Mehmed. So
Yeah,
please,
Vlad
guys,
the Impaler. Yeah.
yeah, it's I'm still shaken from that series, Darth Leto.
Oh, I imagine
I was not expecting to be shaken from it. But
from Vlad because of the depiction of Vlad.
yeah,
Yeah.
I and yes, and
Yeah.
there's a lot in it. It was beautifully done, as beautifully done as part one. Oh, good guys, if you are still around, check out the Outcast Creatives has an interview that's going to go on in 30 minutes. Thank you, the Outcast Creatives, for letting us know. And you know something, yeah, that Vlad really, I'm still freaked out by it, Darth Plato. So any show that can grab you like that certainly has done its job. I learned a little bit more about impalings than I would have liked to, but that's okay. I had no choice. So great to see you today, Darth Plato. Thank you for helping me with this fantastic review of a show that I love. And for all of you out there, no matter where you are in the galaxy, and thank you, Tom Jr. Jackson. We are all good people for moderating and everything you do. Um, yes, no matter where you are, everybody out there in the galaxy, always do remember to please be kind. Take care,
Well,
everybody. Live long and prosper.